much, and thank you all for coming out this evening. I, as always, when I talk about anything, never figure out what I'm going to say until I get there. I used to have, and I always have something written, and I have things written down, but I never use them anymore. I used to, and then I got bored. So now what I do is just sort of figure out what I want to say depending on what the audience is when I see the audience. So what I want to tell you tonight, and then we'll have some Q&A, which I always found to be more fun than anything else, is to tell you a little bit about this book and how I came to it and how I researched it and how I found the pictures in it, which is really an interesting story, and why I think it's important and what I think should be done now. And then we'll see. I called Eric Holder yesterday, who's the new Attorney General, to tell him how wonderful it was that he made his Black History Month speech about race, because the campaign has studiously tried not to talk about race, and we know why. Most of us were quite willing to have Obama not talk about it if he could just get elected. That was all, whatever it took. But Eric, who put together some speeches, he's given them before and talked about the race issues in our society in a way not to be accusatory, but just to simply admonish all of us to get on with the business of solving these problems. I think that that is a reminder. Now, before I did this book, And Justice for All, I had the last two books that I did. The last one was about a black woman who started a movement to get pensions as reparations in 1897. And the interesting thing about this particular book, and I fell in love with it, and I can't really write books anymore or articles or anything else unless I like the topic. I have to fall in love with whatever I'm writing about it. I can be objective, but if I find it totally boring, then I just discard it and go on to something else. And when I found out about this woman, and I started asking people if they knew anything about her, I called up John Hope Franklin, who's supposed to know everything about black history. He said, I never heard of her, don't know anything about her. What did she do? I called up everybody who works in the period, and after the Civil War, nobody knew anything about her. And then finally I said, well, John Hope, I knew a little bit about her years ago when I was a graduate student. And I found some information on her, but then I left it and went on to something else and forgot about it. So he said, well, you know more about it than anybody else, so, you know, keep digging. And so I dug and came up with what I think her story is a wonderful story. And it is now accepted by historians that she had the largest movement of African Americans that has ever existed. She had 300,000 dues-paying members in 1897. That's according to the federal government, which put her in jail for organizing. That's the thanks she got for trying to get pensions for the old ex-slaves, and she was born a slave herself. So that was one kind of story, and it took a lot of digging because she didn't have papers. She was a washerwoman with 5 children. Her husband was dead. She took in washing. That's how she made a living, washing and ironing. And she had very little money. She had a primary school education, but yet she did all of this at a time when women did not lead anything except women's clubs or something like that. And she did it, and I just thought it was wonderful. The other book that I did right before that one is called The Pig Farmer's Daughter. And that, people would say to me about that book, are you a pig farmer, and is it a biography? Are you writing your autobiography of yourself as a pig farmer's daughter? And I said, no, what it is about a black guy who in Texas in 1888 was charged with rape of a white woman. And I immediately, when I read about it, assumed, oh, well, the brother got lynched. So I was going to read the next thing and hear about how he got lynched, you know. And then I read, and he didn't get lynched. And then I said, well, I wonder why they didn't lynch him. And then they put him in jail, and the local sheriff and everybody protected the jail to keep him from getting dragged out. I said, that's very unusual. And he was a poor working man. He didn't have it, as far as I could tell. And then the next thing that happened, he went to court, and this jury, the all-white male jury, and I said, I know they're going to convict him, and they did. Then I said, well, that's the end of that. Now they'll lynch him. He didn't. And then he appealed. He had a lawyer. I said, where did he get this lawyer from? Because very few people had lawyers then. They didn't have legal aid or legal services or anything like that. And he had a lawyer, a very fine lawyer in the state, very experienced lawyer. I said, where did this man get this lawyer from? And his case went to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court overturned his conviction, and he went on back to work like nothing had happened. I said, now I got to figure this one out. And it took some doing. And I finally found that what it came down to was the same thing as the story I tell in the book about my Uncle Lincoln in Nashville, Tennessee. My Uncle Lincoln was a scamp. He was a hard worker at work. He worked for this rich white man down at the car place. But every Saturday night he got drunk. And when he got drunk, he got in a fight. And he'd end up in jail. And my Aunt Mary would call all around trying to find Uncle Lincoln. And she would find him. They'd say, he's in there drunk again. And she'd call his boss, and his boss would come down there and say, that boy Lincoln's a good boy. As soon as he sleeps it off, you send him on home. And they did. So I said, maybe it's a story like that. And sure enough, it turned out that this black guy worked for the most wealthy, the wealthiest landowner and manufacturing factory owner in the state. And he called up his good brother, Supreme Court Justice, and said, he's a good boy, he works hard for me, and he doesn't fudge on the rights of white people, you send him on home. And besides, that woman he's supposed to rape was a trashy white woman, she's just a pig farmer's daughter. Wow. And that's what the story was. Anyway, now, so then on to, after that, the Justice for All, the Commission on Civil Rights. In 2004, when George Bush and I had a little problem, the Civil Rights Commission, when I was chair, wrote a report about him accusing him of trying to redefine civil rights in America, because he was saying that, you know, it was a civil right to give money to people, religious people, without regard to whether or not it violated the separation of church and state, that it was okay not to enforce voting rights in the Justice Department, and all the bad stuff you heard about the Bush people. And so we wrote a report documenting what they weren't doing, and he didn't like it. And he had already not been too happy with the commission, because in 2001 we went to Florida and we did a report after the 2000 election on how he stole it, and how all these people who were supposed to be voting and who were registered to vote, mostly blacks and Latinos, you heard about the butterfly ballot and this and that, but there were what we called at the commission the no count, the people who didn't even get to vote, who were registered, who should have been able to vote, and when they went, they wouldn't let them vote. And so we went down there and we subpoenaed Jeb Bush and Catherine Harris and all these people and made them all come up there. And we found out exactly what they'd done. And we had testimony from the people who it happened to. And they explained to us that one of them, you know, several of them were accused of being felons. You probably heard about this. And one man, I remember Reverend Willie Whiting, and he's in this book, and he said, you know, I had never even been arrested, never even been to the courthouse except to serve on a jury. And I vote here every time there's an election in this polling place, and this woman is telling me that I'm a felon. And not only that, she yells out in front of everybody in the polling place. And I'm there with my wife and my kids, and one of them's 21, he's going to vote for the first time. And they stand up there and say, well, Mr. Whiting, you're a felon, you can't vote. And he said, I was just outraged. And I was embarrassed, I was outraged. This happened to FAMU students, Florida A&M University students, who were registered and had registered on campus. They wouldn't let them vote. And so we documented this. Well, the Bush administration was very unhappy with us because it added fuel to the fire of them, you know, ripping off the election. And we helped Congress to pass a law called the Help America Vote Act. As a result of that, through some maneuvers, which I talk about in the book, Mr. Bush decided that my term was up on the commission. And I would have sued him, like I had sued another earlier president named Reagan, and beat him. But since Mr. Bush won the election in November 2004, remember he beat John Kerry, I knew that in January he would still be there anyway, and my term was going to be up in January sometime anyway, so I didn't sue him. But when I left the commission, a number of people who were publishers and people asked me, did I want to write a book about my experiences at the commission.